I'd like to talk about the style of Pride and Prejudice, the famous free indirect discourse technique that Austen uses to kind of float in and out of different characters' perspectives. It's a third person technique that allows various other characters to color what that allegedly third person narrator is saying, but without really pinning down exactly who is saying what at any time. Um, it creates the question of who is speaking in a artistically productive way. It starts with the famous first sentence. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a man, young, and a single man and one with a fortune must be in want of a wife. Okay, I mangled it. Welcome to YouTube. It is not a truth universally acknowledged. In fact, we cannot get everybody to agree to that. In fact, we couldn't get Bingley and Darcy necessarily to agree to that. Who is, what do we mean? Everybody agrees. Who's everybody? And whose voice is this? Is that the perspective of Mrs. Bennet and her kind of coterie of likewise of mothers who with marriageable daughters, universally acknowledged, single man, good fortune, gotta want a wife, got a daughter right here. Is it an ironic, like they move to universally, it is a truth universally acknowledged rather than everybody knows. This move to this lofty plane of axiom, a philosophical axiom, is a kind of joke at the expense of the everybody knows. You know, Austen does it again later in volume one, where she talks about it was absolutely necessary a couple times. It's absolutely necessary that the two younger sisters go off to Meriden. It was absolutely necessary that the Bennet sisters and the Lucas sisters talk over the ball. Absolutely had to happen. Absolutely necessary is that phony, that jokey mock formality. Um, they had to do. The kids had to do it. Absolutely necessary, making it third person. Okay, this is a very productive technique for Austen, and no one taught it to her. There was no name for this technique. It might actually have been considered irregularity, informality. She's head hopping, whatever. She just knows that that is actually how people speak, and she did it that way. So this goes with a couple other things about the style. Famously, it's an ironic style where sentences give different meanings depending on how you read them from what perspective. Is the truth universally acknowledged? Is this Mrs. Bennet speaking? Is this someone joking at Mrs. Bennet's expense? It could be both. Um, it's also the case, but the irony, the jokes at people's expense, and that dry irony needs the reader to be in on the joke. It is a participatory form of prose fiction. This also goes with the fact that narrator whose voice is everywhere is an omniscient narrator, though sometimes acts like a third-person limited narrator, chooses to be limited. This narrator, most importantly, knows what Darcy is thinking when Elizabeth doesn't. Elizabeth is the protagonist, and sometimes this book reads like it's from her point of view. Sometimes it limits herself to what she can know and detect. She sees Wickham and Darcy together, one blushes, one blanches, blood runs out of one's face into the other's, because these guys are symbiotic, whatever one gains, the other loses. We're not told which. Elizabeth sees which, we're not told it. But also, we're not told what to think. Suddenly, we don't have access to Darcy's mind anymore. Now we're just in kind of the world of Elizabeth Bennet, girl detective. But before that, we got access to Darcy's thoughts. Elizabeth had no idea Darcy was getting progressively sweeter on her, and the narrator lets us know. Then the narrator chooses to withhold. Withholding information is key to Austen's narrative technique. She does it every time, and every time she drops a new load, it's of information on us, a new load of exposition. Most famously, the dead center of the book, Mr. Darcy's letter. It withholds other things. It creates new mysteries. So we meet Wickham. He and Darcy have some connection. We're going to withhold that. Once we find out, there are going to be other mysteries. We're going to then have the reveal, okay, Wickham has run away with Lydia, etc. Withholding is the standard narrative strategy. It's also specifically associated with the male characters. Mr. Bennet, as the critics have noticed, does this to his wife and daughters immediately. He goes and talks to Bingley and makes plans for, like, basically sets up the eventual dinner invitation without telling them and springs the surprise on them. Mr. Bennet does that. Austen does that over and over again.